And I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Heather Kennedy. I'm the lead consultant on the performance assessment team for the new literacy performance assessment that will be coming online in 2025. And we have a few of our other consultants with us today. So I'll let James Webb go ahead and introduce himself very quickly.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm James Webb, lead consultant with the Ed Specialist Cal TPA.
And then we'll go ahead and go to Gay Roby.
Good afternoon. This is Gay Roby. I am the lead consultant for the Administrator Performance Assessment. Glad you're with us today.
And I don't think that Zoltan Sarda and Cassandra Henderson have joined us yet, but they are also our performance assessment consultants for the General Education Cal TPA and the ECE Cal TPA, Cal FTPA. And I believe we have Amy Rising also with us, our Chief Deputy Director. So I'll go ahead and let her say a few words as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all this afternoon. I know there's a lot of crazy weather going on, so we appreciate that you are inside and dry and out of the wind and with us this afternoon. We look forward to having a very in-depth conversation about what's coming around the whole world of literacy and making sure that all students and children in California can read. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Heather and she'll get us started.
Thank you. I would also like to welcome with us today, we have some guest presenters. And so we have Tanya Fleshman, and I'll let her introduce herself really quick.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here today. My name is Tanya Fleshman. I am co-director for the CSU Center for the Advancement of Reading and Writing, and I'm also a professor of elementary literacy education at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
And I will also let Roxanne Purdue, who's a consultant with Professional Services Division, introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Roxanne Purdue, and I spent probably the last year and a half or so working in the area of literacy and developing the standards with a team of individuals, including Heather, that was part of the team. And now I'm happy to dig in deeper with you, and I'm probably more excited than you are about today's presentation. I'm really excited to hear Tanya speak. So.
As always, we'd like to start with our meeting norms. Your microphones have been muted upon entry. If you are asked to speak, we would ask that you unmute your microphone and go ahead and speak with us. This is a meeting and not a webinar. We like to use our chat feature during these presentations. We have lots of consultant staff here who will help monitor that conversation. So we'll either respond to you in the chat or we will actually save it for a time when the speaker has a spot where they can have questions and answers. But the first thing we use our chat room feature for is to find out who is with us. So if you would please enter your name and your institutional affiliation for our attendance purposes so we can know who's in there. So I would write Gay Roby, CTC. So, and then B tells you some of the things we'd like to do. Please comment on the thoughts, give us some additional ideas, suggest relevant research you might know of, and also post your questions that are related to effective literacy instruction, but for all students. We do ask that those questions that you post be of a general focus, have them at a program level and not go down to specifics with a particular candidate or your particular a job assignment as well. Fourthly, we do ask that you avoid multitasking. This is going to be a very rich hour and a half, 2 hours. I don't remember how much it's scheduled for, but to access all the information that's being presented, number one, yes, we are recording it so you can go back to it, but also having full attention was really helpful for us as well. However, we do ask that you honor time for our participants and our presenters by moderating your participation. So if you have 1,000 questions, maybe you'll ask just 100 of them instead of the 1,000. We would appreciate that as well.
Thank you, Gay. And just to frame our thoughts for today, we have 2 questions for you to think about. We have one related to our colleagues who may be working in administrative performance assessment, and that is what skills and knowledge do today's teachers and administrators need to possess in regard to literacy and the current policy landscape in California. And for those working in teacher performance assessment, what can our preliminary programs do to prepare for the new literacy program standard and TPEs to assist our candidates in developing these skills and knowledge so that they are prepared for the literacy performance assessment that will be operational in 2025. So just some things to think about. And yes, we will make sure that a copy of today's slides are available in a folder after today's presentation. So we've gone through our introductions and our norms, and next we'll be going into a brief overview of SB 488, which is the bill that's been driving this literacy work in California. We'll go through the big picture of these standards and TPEs and talk about some resources that are available to you. We'll talk about the literacy standard and TPEs, and then we'll hear from our expert in the field, Tanya Fleischman, and have some time for some questions and answers. And with that, I will turn it over to Roxanne Perdue to talk a little bit about SB 488.
So you think that I wouldn't have anything to say before we hit our overview, but I do. I always have something to say. So what I want to say is that when you search for a bill, bill numbers are repeated. And so in the past, SB 48 has been used and it will be used in the future. So when you're searching for a bill in the future and you think you can do a search or a Google on it, this is 2021-22 bill. Even though we're in 23 now, we've done a lot of work in that year. And now we have approved standards and TPEs for all of the credentials it impacts. And with that, we'll go ahead and move into an overview. I do want to say all of us come from a different perspective when we enter this conversation about SB 488. Some of you here have are at a beginner's level and you haven't heard much about it. Others have had conversations with friends and colleagues about SB 48. And you've heard some things that are maybe rumors, some things which are accurate rumors, and maybe some inaccurate rumors. And we'll hopefully clear some of that up today. And then finally, we have some people who have gone to every commission meeting or viewed every commission meeting, and they've gone to every workshop that's been available and any public meetings that are there. And so they've heard a lot. So they think, what more can they tell me about SB 488? And I say to you that we customize our slides based on the audience we're talking to, what our concept is for that day. And so today our overview is about the content of teacher preparation. So we're going to look at SB 48 through the lens of teacher preparation today. So what are some things that would impact teacher preparation, your program potentially, and your candidates? First of all, it's an evidence-based means of teaching foundational skills. And that includes what they consider foundational skills within SB 48, which is print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics, word recognition, and fluency. Do we ever go beyond a bill? Yes, you'll find that this has opportunities for us to expand beyond the exact language of the bill. So we'll talk about that as we move through the presentation. So it also involves tiered supports for pupils, including reading difficulties, English learners, and even exceptional needs, both in both directions. And so you might see that and think about MTSS, multi-tier systems of support. You have ongoing diagnostic techniques and early intervention. I know that's a concern for some people, the diagnostic techniques and the diagnosis part. That's something we'll address in today's presentation to an extent. And then it's here's an opportunity for more that we talked about. It's aligned to SBE adopted ELA ELD framework. So the State Board of Education adopted English Language Arts Literacy, English Language Development Framework. And so it says we can align with that. So we talk about foundational skills right at the beginning, and that's one major focus of SB 488. But do you go beyond foundational skills when thinking about literacy? Of course you do. And so aligning with the framework allows us to look beyond foundational skills, include foundational skills, but look at some of the other concepts of literacy that we need to address. And continuing because that's not the end of what SB 48 encompasses for our programs. We have incorporation of the California Dyslexia Guidelines. Now, one thing I'm going to point out here is that I just talked about the frameworks. And you'll notice that when I talked about the frameworks, I talked about how we have to align with the frameworks. Well, here it says we have to incorporate the California Dyslexia Guidelines. So words are important in bills. The bills turn into the education code when you look at bills that pertain to education, and specifically the commission addressed bills. You'll find that the majority of the content will be found in the education code. So it becomes the law. So what is the difference between align and incorporate? Something to address within this presentation and beyond. What does it look like to incorporate the guidelines? And then thinking about those foundational skills again, because it's really highlighted within the bill. It involves organized, systematic, explicit, and direct foundational skill instruction, and also practice and connected text. And then we have, as we expect, strong literature, language, comprehension components with a balance of oral and written language. We'll talk about that a little bit further as we dig a little deeper. We have integrated methods of teaching language arts for multiple subject and ed specialists. Those integrated methods will also dive deeper on as we move through this presentation. So what are some other features that might impact your program of SB 48? One is certification of programs. So if you have a program already for multiple subject or ed specialists, for example, you're going to find that you still need to transition because we have our new standard 7 and the accompanying TPEs that you need to address for your program to be up to date and accurate, and of course abiding by the law. So thinking about that, we have to certify the programs. Now it's going to be a little different than what you've experienced in the past with the transition of programs. Transition of programs in the past, and we've done some recently with Ed Specialist, those new standards and the PPS standards. And so with that, we've had an opportunity to do some transition work where you submit maybe responses to the new standards, and then also maybe a matrix that addresses the new TPEs. Certification is going to be a little bit more in depth, and you're going to be looking at its we'll address in detail later, but thinking about more like a program review. And we'll see what exactly you need to do from the professional services division at a later date. And then we have, of course, performance assessment, which is the focus, part of the focus of today. And we have the performance assessment team with us. And the only thing I'll say about that is that you know that you have until 2025, and then it starts for us, fall 2025. Okay, and so in your breakout room, take a moment to reflect on the information regarding SB 48 within your group. Some potential discussion questions are: what was new information to you? What was information you had heard previously? And how might this impact you in the next 2 years? So lead up to that 2025 implementation date on our performance assessment. And
All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up your breakout rooms. Everybody. And thank you. So we have restarted our recording, and we're going to go ahead and go back to Roxanne, and she's going to go over a few more things for us.
sorry, I forgot to unmute.
That's okay.
So now we're going to take a look at the big picture, and we'll dig a little deeper like I promised. But still, I want to point out that it says big picture here. So if there's something in these slides and you say, wait, what does that phrase mean? Or, I want to know more about that. Don't worry, they're going to dig deeper as you go along. This slideshow was titled really well. Dig deeper is what we do the whole entire time. So as we move through, we'll focus on first the framework. I talked about the framework before and how we need to align to the framework. Well, this is called the circles of implementation, and you'll find it in the ELA-ELD framework that was adopted by the State Board of Education, and it's in Chapter 2, page 53. You'll also find it in some shared resources that we'll be providing to you after this presentation. And so this graphic, along with more text that goes with the graphic and a more comprehensive explanation, is available to you as part of the what we provide you. And also SB 48, key points on it, education code sections. If you want to know more than what I told you, that's a resource we give you. And as a special treat, that resource on key points has a link to the actual text of SB 48, so you can read the whole bill if you want, for fun. So let's talk about circles of implementation. I love this circle, and you can go from outside to inside, or you can go inside to outside. I decided today I'm going to go inside to outside. So where does it all start for you? Does it start with the framework? No, it digs deeper. It goes to the standards that lead to the framework. So thinking about our friends at the Department of Ed, they've got standards for the California English Language Development Standards, the Cal-ELD standards there in the very center of our circle. Then they have the California CCSS for ELA and literacy standards. And they take those two standards and they bring them together and they make the framework from that. So what's in the framework? We talked about how it addresses more than foundational skills. So you see those circles around our inside circle. We have one that says effective expression, one that says meaning making, language development, content knowledge. Well, all of those are addressed within the framework. And so when I said it goes beyond foundational skills, here are some major concepts that we address within our standards because it's aligned with the framework and because it involves good literacy instruction. So thinking about that literacy instruction, how do we get there? We need to have candidates who learn how to be engaging, motivating. They need to know how to integrate this information and these skills. So they're not necessarily sequential. You're integrating these skills not only with each other, but also thinking about it across disciplines. It's got to be intellectually challenging to their students that they're teaching, and they need to be respectful and not just of the content that they're providing, but thinking about what they're providing in terms of the students and their backgrounds, their level of literacy that they come to your classroom with, and whether they're an English learner, for example. And then that leads us to our final goal, which is looking at the 21st century. Do they have students that they're developing into capacities of literate individuals? Do they have students that they're developing into broadly literate individuals? Are they creating students with a readiness for college or a career and civic life? All of these are final goals of a literate individual. And that's what we have within the framework in that chapter 2, page 53. So looking a little deeper, we talked about integration a little bit. Let's go a little deeper on integration as a theme. So integration as a theme involves several aspects that I'll talk about. The first are the strands of the language arts standards, the Common Core State Standards, CCSS. I didn't say that before, I'm sorry for using an acronym. So what's in that? Reading is in that. What's involved with reading? Literature, informational text, and foundational skills again on reading instruction, and of course more. This is in brief. What else is involved? Reading. Beyond reading, we have writing, we have speaking and listening. That's key because sometimes we forget that it's both, and language, as we talked about earlier. So then we move into English language arts and literacy standards for CDE, California Department of Education. Remember how I said it goes across disciplines? So we're integrating across disciplines. As we think about literacy, we go beyond that TK through grade 3-5, and we enter into the secondary level. And where do we go with literacy on the secondary level? We integrate and we think about, for example, every student has questions they need to answer or problems they need to solve in every content area going across disciplines. That involves literacy. So there's areas where you can integrate literacy across disciplines, and that's something your candidates need to learn about with these new standards. So English language arts and literacy and English language development all make up the that framework we talked about. And part 1 involves interacting in a meaningful way. Part 2 involves learning about how English works. Part 3 is using foundational skills, integrated and designated ELD. And then cross-cutting themes of the standards. So here I'm going to spend a little bit of time thinking about cross-cutting themes of the standards. We go and see if this sounds familiar to you. Foundational skills, meaning making, language development, effective expression, and content knowledge. And what might that sound familiar like? We just saw our circles of implementation, and we found this from the Think framework, and it was those circles that described effective literacy instruction. Are you going to see these same themes again as we dig deeper? Absolutely. So don't worry, you'll see more. Thinking about integration as a theme, though, there's something about integration that I had read that I wanted to share with you. The program also builds candidates' understanding that high quality literacy instruction integrates all strands of ELA literacy standards and all parts of the ELD standards and other disciplinary standards to develop student capacities as effective and critical readers, writers, listeners, and speakers. So thinking about integration as a theme with your candidates, it's an area to really emphasize as you move into these new standards. And so how do we ensure that all students succeed? We have Universal Design for Learning, UDL. We have equity asset-based approaches. And as we talk about these, are you going to say what's universal? First of all, someone says, what's UDL? What's Universal Design for Learning? Well, don't worry, because what are we going to do? We're going to dig deeper. You're going to find that these phrases that ensure all students succeed are going to be something that you hear about in an overview, an overarching overview that leads into our standards, and that is part of our standards. So multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, best first instruction, targeted supplemental instruction, and intensive intervention. Will you find that in the standards? Absolutely. Multi-biliteracy and ELD, is that in the standards? Absolutely. Dyslexia and other disabilities, we already know that's incorporated, so it's in the standards, absolutely. So we will hear about these again. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Heather Kennedy.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. So now we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at our literacy standards and TPEs. And what I'd like to do is take a look at this graphic and talk about how these were developed, starting with our multiple and single subject literacy standard and TPEs. And from there, we moved into developing the education specialist standards and TPEs for literacy for mild to moderate and extensive support needs, and the standards and TPEs for our PK to 3 early childhood education. And then we moved in to working on our low incidence special education areas for early childhood special education, deaf and hard of hearing and visual impairments, which were just adopted at the February 2023 commission meeting. And you can see that these were all derived from one common trunk, just as our other TPEs have been as well. And so what I would like to do now is go ahead and look at the structure of the program standard. The structure is the same for all credential areas. So we always start with the introduction and overarching concepts, which again includes the cross-cutting themes. from the ELA/ELD framework, our foundational skills, meaning making, language development, effective expression, and content knowledge. And then we have a section on literacy instruction for students with disabilities, integrated and designated English language development, and how the literacy teaching performance expectations and clinical practice are addressed. And what's important is that while the structure of the standard is the same for all of the credential areas, it is specified to the authorization statements for each of those credentials. And in our overarching concepts in the introduction, again, you'll see the standards in the ELA and ELD framework, universal design for learning, asset-based pedagogies, socially just learning environments, integration of strands, so those reading and writing, speaking and listening, and language standards, and the California Comprehensive State Literacy Plan, and a few other items. And some of these may look very familiar to you in the work and performance assessment. Universal design for learning and asset-based instruction is a huge part of the work that we are already doing in performance assessment. Continuing with what is in our overarching concepts, we again address multi-tiered systems of support. Again, our California dyslexia guidelines, very important in this literacy process. And while all of these things may be applicable in areas outside of literacy, we're using them specifically in this standard and in these TPEs through the lens of literacy. So what we would like to give you a brief moment to do now is to talk about what was familiar in seeing this big picture, the overarching concepts, and what are some areas that you might need to learn more about in order to successfully support candidates. So I'm going to put you back into your breakout rooms for a few brief moments. If you could add that in the chat, thank you. And again, as you're returning from your breakout rooms, if you could add to the chat a concept that was familiar to you, or maybe indicate an area that you might need to learn more about in order to successfully, in order to successfully support candidates. Thank you. So I'm seeing some familiarity with the literacy domains and integrated and designated ELD, familiarity with MTSS and UDL, some additional support with the California dyslexia guidelines. Additional information on what candidates are responsible for knowing regarding dyslexia. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. And as you're continuing to put those into the chat, I'll briefly touch on what is in the TPE elements and how these correspond. And while I'm talking about this, I am going to put a resource for you in the chat for you to view. And what's great about the way that the standard and the TPEs work together is that there are corresponding standard and TPE elements. And so you can see here, for example, the introduction and overarching concepts correspond with TPE elements 7.1, 2, 3, 4, and parts of 7.10 and 7.11. You can see for each of the cross-cutting themes that there is a TPE element that corresponds. And then for students with disabilities and for integrated and designated ELD as well. So the standards and the TPEs really work very cohesively for literacy domain, TPE domain 7 and for standard 7. And the document that I put into the chat is a crosswalk of the corresponding standard sections and TPEs. And this might be a helpful resource for you as we continue to dive deeper into this topic. And what you'll see is that there are highlighted sections of what corresponds between the TPE elements and the standard. And so this is one page from that document that I've put up on the slide. And you can see that in the overview, we have the ELA, ELD standards, and framework, which is also included in TPE 7.1. And you can see how these two things work together. And that document is there for you to use as a resource. And what we would like to do before we're actually going to, oh, you're welcome. I'm glad that that document is very helpful. Great. Is go ahead and for the sake of time, I'm not going to actually put you back in breakout rooms for this one. So thank you for being flexible with me in this presentation, because I do have a couple more things we need to cover before we turn it over to Tanya. I just want you to take a moment and think about the information you've received so far regarding all of this, and including the literacy TPEs and the implementation timeline, knowing that this is coming in 2025. And think about what impact does this have on your work with candidates as you engage in performance assessment. And you can take this reflective moment internally, or if you would like and you feel brave, you can go ahead and share that in the chat if that's something that you feel could be for the good of the group. And I am going to go ahead and let Gay speak to the application for some of this work in regards to the APA.
You might be thinking, we're looking at a lot of information that has to do with teaching performance standards and teaching preliminary requirements. What does this have to do with leadership and our administrative services credential? Well, we would like to suggest that today's candidates, tomorrow's leaders, are going to be leading staff who have to deal with the implementation that's right around the corner of literacy standards. So it behooves our preliminary programs as well as our CLEAR programs to start incorporating information around these standards and the implementation, how is it going to fit into our current coursework with their candidates. So we wanted to look at it through the cycle of our leadership cycles. We have 3 cycles. The first one talks about analyzing data to inform school improvement and promote equity. The second one, facilitating a small group of educational practitioners. And the third group is coaching cycle, coaching teacher growth to help them improve their practice. Within each of these cycles, we have a recursive step wheel that, as you see, goes around and around and around. We always start with investigate. So look and see what is before you plan to make a move, implement that move by acting upon the plan, and finally reflect on how that has affected your leadership skills. So we have just 3 fast little ways that maybe perhaps someone who is doing the administrator performance assessment might fit in literacy skills. So in leadership cycle 1, they may start including data that focuses on literacy skills or dyslexia proficiencies. During leadership cycle 2, the community of practice decides on a problem of practice, which is an activity from the educators, not the students, that they might select a problem of practice that is literacy related. And when it boils down to a strategy to try, maybe they would choose to implement a literacy tenet that needs to be included in coursework for our TK-12 students. And then finally, in leadership cycle 3, the volunteer teacher's lesson may focus on or maybe include elements of literacy, so that you can start embedding pieces of literacy within the educational courses and coursework and field work that we do with our administrative services candidates.
Thank you, Kay. And to cover the same information for the Cal TPA instructional cycles for multiple subject, single subject, and education specialists. In cycle 1, our multiple, and it's a reminder, our multiple and single subject candidates are learning about students in planning instructions, and our education specialist candidates are learning about students with IEPs and planning instruction. And in instructional cycle 2, we're looking at assessment-driven instruction or assessment-driven instruction for students with IEPs, following that cycle of plan, teach and assess, reflect, and apply. And looking at this with literacy, the way the cycles are currently structured, candidates currently have the choice to complete cycle 1 or cycle 2 in the area of literacy, looking at planning, instruction, assessment, reflection, and or application, providing attention to literacy concepts and principles, where they're looking at environments in which students can read and write, comprehend and compose, appreciate and analyze, and perform and enjoy the language arts through a multiplicity of texts, and develop oral communication and interpersonal skills. And so if you could please take a moment in the chat and share, how is literacy already embedded in the support you provide for candidates when engaging with performance assessment? And I will put that question in the chat as well. Thank you, Becky, for sharing that the literacy class is the same semester as the Cal TPA class. And Sylvia, that in your single subject coursework, candidates include ELA, ELD standards in addition to the content standards for their lesson. That's a great way to look at integrating that content knowledge cross-cutting theme. Multiple literacy courses. Oh, and multiple subject and mild moderate candidates take those together. That's great. While you all continue to share those great ways you're supporting candidates in the chat, I am going to move our slide forward to our time frame. Remember that we are in the very beginning stages of this work in the performance assessment. So you can see I started our time frame back a little bit into 2022 when the commission approved the standards and TPEs for our multiple single subject ed specialists, mild to moderate and extensive support needs in our PK to 3 credentials. And then we are just now starting the work group design team process next week. So this is very beginning work, and I'm sure we will have a lot more information for you as this continues to develop. But we wanted to make sure that we're starting this process with you so that you could start to think about and ruminate on this information, because we know that there is a lot of information, and we wanted to make sure that you had this introduction to this information. And so the work group design team will continue to meet after their initial meeting, and we'll begin the pilot work in January to April 2024, and then move into a field test in 2025 in order to meet that 2025 deadline that is in SB 488. And with that, our design team work group that has been appointed is listed here on these next two slides. So you can see that we have a variety of areas represented. We have our multiple and single subject experts. We have classroom teachers that are indicated by our plus signs. We have education specialists. We have people who have indicated experience with dyslexia. Those are indicated by the asterisk. And when we go to our next slide, we have our PK to 3 colleagues, our ELD and bilingual colleagues, and our education specialist low incidence area colleagues represented. So we really have a wide variety of expertise on this team. And before I turn it over to Tanya to talk about some more application, I'm going to put some links in the chat for you for resources. There's a Google folder where we'll upload the slides for this presentation, along with the documents that I've been putting in the chat as we've been moving through this presentation. There's also a deeper dive into the PK to 3 standard and TPEs that has been recorded, and some additional information related to that specific credential. And I'm going to drop that in the chat as well. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tanya.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Thanks again for the invitation to come and talk with you all today about the work we're doing at the CSU Center for the Advancement of Reading and Writing, or CARW, as I'll refer to it throughout my talk today. In our time together, I'm going to be sharing the process that we're undergoing at the center as we aim to help our CSU teacher preparation programs transition to the new literacy program standard and TPEs. So at the outset, I just want to say, I want to make sure I say that this transition plan that I'm going to share with you was designed in collaboration and specifically for CSU teacher preparation programs in California. And as the CSU system is so diverse and is made up of so many different campuses, it needed to be broad and nimble enough to be able to work in lots of different contexts, but also be, meaningful and specific enough to do this work in a timely and thoughtful way. And so hopefully today, even though your context may be different than mine, you might be able to get some value from the plan that I'm going to share with you. So I thought it would be helpful just to start by just sharing a little bit about, you can go back, I'm still back one slide, sorry, Heather. Share with you a little bit about our context. So I am a co-director for the CSU Center for the Advancement of Reading and Writing. Our mission is dedicated to excellence in literacy instruction, and that's largely through the promotion of and preparation of knowledgeable and highly skilled teachers in the area of literacy specifically. And we realize we need to do that work in community with our partners, of course, which many of them are listed here on this slide. And we are housed in the CSU Chancellor's Office in the Office of Educator Preparation and Public School Programs. And I'm going to be referring throughout this talk, I'm going to be referring to a faculty council. And so one of my roles as a co-director is to guide the 23-member CSU faculty council. So we have a member from each of the teacher preparation programs across the state in the CSU system. And so those individuals will be talked about a lot in this presentation today. So just for some context. Great, next slide. At the outset of this work, I realized as the co-director and trying to lead and shepherd this work for the faculty, that it was really important that I myself was informed. Envisioning a transition process required me to, it requires me to make educated decisions about how I'm going to lead faculty through this process. And so fortunately, myself and the other co-director were able to participate in the CTC SB 488 literacy work group. And so we were part of that group, which met over a series of days and was really helpful and informative. And I've participated in a lot of other informational sessions just to try and educate myself, but then also trying to gather information both at the institutional level across the CSU and at the faculty level to help inform that. So just want to say that at the outset. Next slide. So reflecting on this work and our work around this transition is that I can kind of lump it into 4 types of work that we've got going on. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these today and provide some examples of products and processes that we're engaging in. So as you can see, this process isn't linear necessarily. I mean, it's depicted linearly, but we've got these arrows, and the arrows are intentionally bidirectional because I really think they should actually be circular, and because the work is kind of iterative. It's not like you do one thing and then you move on to the next thing and you don't do the other thing again. They inherently inform each other, and you need to kind of revisit them as we go. And so one of the ways in which we started was just through spreading awareness amongst faculty, information gathering, and doing needs assessments, moving to thinking about what is the process for completing this work, what's a good process for completing this work, and how can we build capacity amongst our faculty to help lead this work. And also thinking about professional learning opportunities for faculty around these new standards. How can we help people learn about this new information that might be added in these standards? And then lastly, thinking about what are some structured supports we can provide that encourage collaboration and support faculty as they do this course. They integrate all the information into their courses. Next slide, please. So our first step was to begin to spread awareness amongst our faculty so that people could begin to understand just what is the work in general. And so we invited some experts to come and talk to our faculty council to help them understand, what the work is. Nancy Brynildson was integral in the creation of the new standards and was a vital part on the CTC, was a consultant to the CTC. And so we invited her to come and speak to our group to help us better understand the new program standard in TPs. If you could get the next slide. So here's just some of the things that Nancy shared with us, helping people understand, what was the design and adoption process like? What is the structure of the program standard in TPEs? Some spotlights on overarching concepts that are new or that, should be foundational to your program. Even feedback from the field review. So what did the field have to say about these new standards? Some information about more dates for performance assessment, and then thinking about what are next steps for TPPs, particularly as it pertains to the certification process. And so you all are getting a lot of this information today as well. So good for you for being here and learning more about it. But so after we oriented faculty to the scope of the work, we felt it was important to begin to gather information about where programs are with the transition and, where they are with the work and, what do we need to learn still, right? What do we need to learn still to do this work? Next slide. So in terms of identified professional learning for faculty, one of the areas that kind of jumped out right away was the California Dyslexia Guidelines, which are included in reference explicitly in the program standard and in the TPEs. So we established a committee amongst the faculty council to kind of investigate where faculty are with this work. And so we designed a pilot survey. We designed a survey that we administered to some select campuses just to kind of try and get a sense of where faculty were and in terms of this learning. And we were going to use this data to help support professional learning opportunities in the future, one of which I'll share with you a little bit later. So next slide. So this is just some of the data that we got. We had around 25 participants respond, and the scale, it's a Likert scale. It ranges from 1 being not at not at all familiar, I believe is what it is, and 5 being very familiar. So we asked things like, how comfortable do you feel integrating these guidelines in your teacher preparation program coursework? And so you can see the range of responses there. Next slide. We also asked them about what content related to the dyslexia guidelines is currently already in your programs. And so this is really informative information for us as leaders and as an institution, because it helps us see, what are the things that people, are already doing. And to some ways we might be able to hypothesize that they feel a certain degree of comfort with that, right? Because it's something they're already doing. So a lot of emphasis in this data was on the role of the classroom teacher and effective approaches for instruction. People felt more comfortable with that type of content. In contrast to the next slide, where we asked them to talk about what might be most challenging to integrate. And so largely the areas that people felt most challenged by was around talking about and thinking about the neuroscience of dyslexia, thinking about dyslexia in English learners, screening an assessment for dyslexia, and using assistive technology. And so this was really helpful information for us thinking moving forward so we can help provide more targeted learning opportunities for faculty. Next slide. We also asked them some open-ended questions about what they felt would be most challenging about the work, and they had a range of responses. We tried to capture the frequency of responses through using a Wordle. Many of you are probably familiar with Wordles, not the game Wordle, but the actual app, little creation design there. And so as you can see, topics is clearly mentioned a great deal. And so you might be wondering, what does that mean? Well, the way that I think most people are meaning it when they responded was referencing the complexity of these topics related to dyslexia and/or their lack of expertise or knowledge in these topics. Additionally, as it relates to topics, faculties felt that the amount of information or topics to be added to an already heavy kind of course syllabus or program could require hard decisions about content. And so know and time are also featured prominently in this design. Like, how am I going to learn or know all this information, and how do I have the time to incorporate it? Next slide. We also felt it important to check in with the faculty council to determine where individual teacher preparation programs were at in relation to this transition work. Next slide. And so looking at the data, I was able to synthesize it to kind of 4 general places where people are at. So you might see yourself or your institution here somewhere probably, but there were 4 kind of points in time where people were. And so the first one, a lot of programs are just in the information gathering phase, which many of you that are here on this call today probably might be here for that exact reason. And they're hoping to learn about the new program standard and understand how other CSU campuses are doing this work so that they can kind of begin to think about the constraints and affordances of doing it at their own campus. Also, there is a good amount of work around just convening the group. Who do we need to include in these conversations to be able to do this work? How can we get them involved? And what is the process for how we're going to be doing this, and kind of building those relationships and processes so that the work can be done. Additionally, people are focusing on new learning. Many of them mentioned, because at the council, we had a focus on professional learning around the dyslexia guidelines. People mentioned that quite a bit, that, I want to learn more about this. So I'm trying to attend these professional learning opportunities. And then lastly, faculty and programs are very interested in finding ways to support this work. So doing things like crafting proposals to be able to put forward to their deans or their administration to seek funding to financially support the work, because it is going to be a significant amount of work. Next slide, please. So after spending time gathering and disseminating information, ensuring that we're all well aware of the work that's before us, we next turn to considering the question, what is a good way to do this work? Because we all know there's lots of ways we can go about doing it. And so this part of our transition plan really focused on 2 aspects: developing a roadmap, if you will, or like a model transition plan that could be used across the CSU for the teacher preparation programs. And then also building capacity. So developing leaders within the center, faculty leaders, to be able to go out and do this work and support the faculty at their respective campuses to do this work. Next slide. So what I'm going to share with you over the next 2 slides is a model. It's an example of a transition plan that one of our wonderful colleagues, Dr. Jamie Marsh from Cal State LA, developed, and we've kind of tweaked it a little bit to make it a little more general, that could be used more generally. So this plan is intended to kind of map out what the work is for a program. And so on the left-hand side, we've got a series of tasks, and on the right-hand side, a timeline for when this work might be completed. And so the first kind of phase of the plan involves like deep collaboration, learning, and thinking. So there's tasks on the left that are related to attending workshops and learning, reviewing the standards and TPEs, and looking for resources, analyzing your current program and the course matrix and syllabi, collaborating with faculty who teach these courses to revise assignments and activities to align with the revised literacy TPEs. So it's kind of, that phase is all around like collaboration, learning, thinking, becoming familiar with the standard, looking at what you have, and kind of working towards this next item, which we've starred, which would be creating a matrix, right, that shows where the literacy TPs will be introduced, practiced, and assessed, and linking to revised course syllabi in there, so that initial work leads up to that matrix. Next slide, please. After that, and also during, I would argue, not necessarily just after, there's a phase of more like member checking, consultation, and accountability. So this is where you're consulting with coordinators of respective programs, you're consulting faculty who teach courses, and essentially you're ensuring you're accountable to your administration, so respective deans and chairs getting their say in looking at the plan and what you've created. Again, this phase of member checking, I would argue, you'd want it to go on while you're doing that planning and thinking work, in addition to the matrix work, because you don't want to get to the end and have people have big concerns about what you've done. So, and after that, it's really more about information dissemination and training, right? So you're doing things like revising program and fieldwork handbooks, your websites, orienting faculty, training supervisors, even potentially cooperating teachers to some respect if you're able to do that. And then ending with implementation, right? Integration by the deadline there. One of the things that you'll notice is that certification is not on here, and or incorporation of the performance assessment. And of course, those are going to be essential steps that would need to be on anybody's transition plan. But we are kind of still waiting to get more information about those 2 things before we felt comfortable incorporating it into a plan. So yeah, so that is a model plan that we're hoping to use. Yeah, so then our next part would be building capacity. So how can we help our faculty do this? By developing and leveraging the expertise and knowledge of our faculty council to support them in this work across the CSU. So yeah, and our plan at the center is to develop faculty leads. And so we're going to involve faculty, select faculty in 2-day, like in-person intensive professional development around the new standard and TPEs, and kind of help them develop a roadmap for their respective campus. That's largely based on the previous roadmap I just showed you. And so these are some of the things that we're going to do together in common, to help build capacity, to help them become faculty leaders, those are some potential agenda items for our training that we're going to do with them, doing things like making sense of the program standard, how to introduce the new TPEs, how to practice, how to assess, how to share a transition plan with your faculty, who should be included in that plan, when are you going to do it, and then allowing for some work time for that. Okay, next slide. So in determining our process for transition, we were able to see the importance of another important phase, which is to understand what faculty need to learn and know, and provide opportunities for professional growth in those target areas. And so as an example of this phase, I was asked to share a bit with you about the targeted learning we've undergone regarding the integration of the California Dyslexia Guidelines. So I'm going to do that now. So one major learning from this process, which I'll kind of also revisit at the end of my talk here, is that this work really needs to be collaborative, and that that we really can and should seek out new and kind of creative partnerships if we can with others in order to best do this work. So I think a really good example of that is the partnership that we've created between ourselves, the Center for the Advancement of Reading and Writing, and the UC-CSU California Collaborative for Neurodiversity and Learning, and also the CTC Dyslexia grantees, who we are going to talk a little bit about here. So it was our intention to create a professional learning community of sorts between these three groups around the common area of dyslexia. And so the following slides are going to show you a synthesis of the professional learning event that we co-created and a module that the collaborative created that we are going to talk through a little bit. So as you can see from the agenda, these are just slides from the professional learning opportunity that we had. As you can see from the agenda, our primary aim was to share the Introduction to Dyslexia module that the task force for the collaborative had created. And so in doing so, we hope to help participants see how they could use this as a tool in their teacher prep program to help meet the content in the California Dyslexia Guidelines and the program standard and TPEs. All CARW faculty council members and all of the CTC grantees were invited to participate. Next slide. The next two slides are basically brief summaries of the 6 modules that the collaborative is creating or has created already. I'm not going to read the slides to you, but just know that there are 3, they're all free, and we're going to talk a little bit about one so you can kind of get a sense of what they're like. And so there's the Introduction to Dyslexia module and the Neuroscience of Dyslexia and the Language and Dyslexia module. And then next slide, there's also 3 modules, one related to screening and assessment for dyslexia, effective approaches to instruction, and early childhood and dyslexia. Next slide. So as you can see, there's a rich and comprehensive content in each of these, and the task force has done the work to show how the modules map onto the chapters in the dyslexia guidelines. We'll have links to the modules available to you later, but you can see here that the module name is at the top, and this shows directly how they are saying the chapters in the dyslexia guidelines are addressed in the respective modules. Next slide, please. So I want to take a minute. I don't have a lot of time, but I want to just take a minute to just show you, just to give you a sense of what the modules look like. They are on the UC-CSU Collaborative's website, and they're really easy and they're free. So there's one available now, and it is available now. And so Heather, if you could start the module, if you could click it for us.
Tanya, I just want to make sure it's showing up on the share screen.
I am just seeing the introduction. I'm not seeing.
Okay, but you are seeing the website.
Yes,
You're
see
not
that.
seeing the
Oh,
slide.
we're good. We're good.
Okay.
Perfect. So this is just the launch page. You can see on the left-hand side, the modules will have common features, but they're very professionally done, and they're really, really thorough. All the modules will start with listing the objectives for the learning module, which you can see here. This is the first one. It's Introduction to Dyslexia. And so it lists the learning objectives here. The modules also in the second item on the left-hand column there, Heather, will do some type of hook, you know, to invite the reader or the participant into the learning. And so this is with a video, and then also they have more resources that they share later. On defining dyslexia on the left-hand side, they'll provide important definitions. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that they engage in kind of like interactive components. So it encourages the participant to check or uncheck things that answers, and then to check those answers, and they're provided feedback on that. The next topic, identifying dyslexia, will provide really interesting and thought-provoking case studies. So if you scroll down, you'll see there are 3 different case studies of 3 different children who, 2 of whom I believe are English learners. So it really helps the participant to get a sense of, how we can recognize characteristics of dyslexia or learning difference in students. If you skip down on the left, Heather, to lingering questions, this is also where they will put some key, frequently asked questions that people ask if you click on one of those. So for example, what's the prevalence of dyslexia in school age population? And is it different from a reading disability? So these are like key commonly asked questions that are asked. And then further down on the left-hand side, got information about consulting with families, and all of the modules will end with like key takeaways, which I find really useful. It helps the learner really, revisit, what have I learned here? Have I learned what I was expected to learn? Have I learned everything I needed to learn? And then there are instructor resources. So this particular module has PowerPoint slides that you can use in a lecture or a class that you have or a training that you're doing. And then lastly, the credits. So you'll get to see the wonderful people who created these. In this particular module, if you scroll down, was created by Dr. Nar and Dr. Sue Sears and Dr. Marianne Wolf. And so this is just a sample of the module. You will have access to the links. They are available and free now. Yeah, so you got a little bit of a taste there. Sorry, it was a super rushed version, but please feel free to look at that link and explore those. Next slide, please. Some resources that I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to share with you. I will reach out to Heather and get them to her, but sorry, my dog. We have slides from a professional development that we did where we introduced the module to people in January, and we have a video of that session, which I'll make available, and there's a link to the module. We are also hoping to have a future learning event in May where we will overview the 2 new modules they've developed, one of which is the neuroscience of dyslexia, and the other is related to screening and assessment. So again, those were all completed by the task force for the collaborative and are great resources. So next slide. After a good deal of care had been taken to really try and understand what people needed to learn and trying to help them get that information, which is kind of what those professional learning opportunities kind of exemplifies, then it really comes time to doing the work, right? Like I say that loosely because there's so much work we've already done already, but to really getting in there and changing classes, finding assignments, new assignments, creating coursework, readings, that type of thing. And so we felt like it was really essential that we seek out supported time for faculty learning, planning, and articulation and development. And so this work is really significant, and it requires structured support for collaborative course conversations. And so the example I'm going to share with you really comes from my role more as a professor in the School of Education at Cal Poly, not so much my role as the co-director at CARW, because I'm also a professor at Cal Poly in our teacher preparation programs. And in that capacity, I applied for and received one of CTC's dyslexia grants for preparation programs. And the purpose of that grant was to help support our multiple single subjects and ed specialist programs integrate the dyslexia guidelines and the new TPEs into our programs. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that process and how I feel like that was really helpful to us in terms of, doing some of this work that we've been building towards. So next slide, please. So first we engaged in so around this work, in terms of just getting in and doing the work and changing courses and making a matrix. So we engaged in some collaborative learning. Many of our faculty were able to attend that training in January. And with that information, we were able to become more versed in the guidelines, and we collaboratively created a series of learning outcomes that cover the key concepts in the guidelines. So what you see on the left there is a screenshot of a Google Doc that we created collaboratively to show you kind of how we're doing this work. So we generated learning outcomes that are based on the dyslexia guidelines from each of the chapters. And then on the right-hand side in the comment function, you can see how we've started to, we're doing articulation, right? We're starting to identify, okay, where does the first learning outcome related to the definition of dyslexia, where does that best live within our this is for our multiple subjects program, I should have said. Where does that best live for our multiple subjects credential program? What class should that live in, and how should it be delivered? And so that's what you're seeing there. And then the other work we've done, which I'm going to highlight next, is around our course development and a matrix. So what you see here is an example of a faculty member who is doing work on redesigning her course. This course is particular to supporting English, second language learners, and it's Education 427, and it is an integral course in our multiple subjects credential program. And so we asked faculty when doing this work to capture things like, how is this work you're doing, which learning outcome is this related to in terms of the guidelines, show us what topics you're covering in your class. What are some, this faculty member included, like, these are the pages in the dyslexia guidelines that it kind of addresses. Here's a link to presentations from seminar. I've also encouraged her to make it more explicit about where the learning outcome is explicitly rated to the guidelines. So you can kind of see this is getting to the nitty gritty, right? Like, this is where we're actually engaging faculty and doing this course revision work at a real kind of fine level. And then the next slide shows you a more comprehensive look. Like, this is a program matrix that we're developing specifically in relation to the dyslexia guidelines. And so you can kind of see here on the far left-hand side, we've got our learning outcomes, and then we are showing what the relevant courses are that this content will be covered in. That's listed at the top. And then we also are showing links to syllabi and or modules that we're going to include, and also showing the layered exposure of the learning. So where are things introduced, where are they practiced, and where are they assessed? This is a draft. This is a super draft. We're still working on it, but this is just kind of an example of how you can try and capture all of this work that people are doing. Okay, in conclusion, I think next slide, and I think this is my last slide. Just coming from my perspective as I've tried to organize and lead this work for pretty diverse different groups of people, there's some, lots of key takeaways I have that might be helpful for you as you're engaging in this work. One is, first, I can't underestimate the power of collective learning around a common objective. Engaging in the information gathering process together has not only served to educate us as a group, but reinforce a common mission and really kind of signals the importance of this work. This work's really important. And so that's been really, really important to really kind of learn together about the new standard, about the new content from the standards. It's been really important. Secondly, hopefully it's become evident through the presentation, the work really can't be done in isolation, and it really shouldn't be done in isolation. It's not optimal. The articulation process requires lots of different voices and perspectives in order to make sure that it's thoughtful and sustained over time and it lasts. And then lastly, and I saw someone mention this in the chat as I was briefly looking, as I was talking, that we do need to find ways to do this work. It requires time and support. And so in my role, I've really tried to work to get support for faculty to do this work. But it would be wonderful if we could think collectively about how to help support this work to be done. I think the CTC's dyslexia grant was an excellent example of how to help support this work to be done. It would be great if we could have other opportunities for that as well. So I think that's where I'm going to end. I know we have like 3 minutes left, but I'm not sure what exact questions.
Yes, so thank you so much, Tanya, for being so generous with your experience and your expertise. And if anybody has any quick questions, if you could go ahead and drop those in the chat. I do see a question about programs still being able to apply for dyslexia grants. Cheryl or Erin, I'm not sure if you're still on and can address that perhaps.
I am still on. My understanding is
you.
that money was available only, it was one-time money, so that it's not currently available. If any of you have advocacy groups out there that are looking for something to tell the legislature we might want, that might be something to do.
Thanks, Cheryl. And I did see a question too that was a little ways back in the chat about having candidates do you plan to have candidates complete all of the dyslexia modules?
That's a great question. I'm not sure yet, to be honest. We definitely have plans in our, and I can speak for Cal Poly myself right now. I'm not going to speak for everyone in the CSU, but at Cal Poly, we definitely have plans to include the introduction module, which is the one that Heather shared with you, and then also the neuroscience module. In part, I think faculty are saying that they'd like to use modules in areas in which they might not feel like they have the expertise on their own campus to be able to address it really, in the depth that they'd like. And so that's one approach faculty are using. I also think that it would be good to have lots of alternative modalities, not just to have the instruction be in modules. So one of the things we're considering is having as like more of a final kind of cumulative assessment regarding the dyslexia outcomes, is incorporating some type of case study where it, engages the teacher candidates in a case study examination of a student presenting with characteristics of dyslexia, and kind of can address a bunch of those different things. So I don't know the answer to that just yet, but my inclination would be no. I don't know that I would use every single one, but I definitely will use multiple.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat right now. I will add resources to the Google folder as well as the slides as they become available. I will add that link one last time. While I'm adding that, I'll just say thank you so much for your attendance with us today. I have the 2 email addresses up here for Cal TPA and Cal APA. If you have any further questions, and thank you so much for joining us as we start this performance assessment work in literacy. We're so appreciative of your interests and your passion in this area, and thank you for coming today.